Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar this Monday evening. My name is Susanna Noggs. I work in the comms team at the General Pharmaceutical Council, and I'm joined tonight by Julian Gravel, who is our Head of Inspection, and Damien Day, who is our Head of Education. Our webinar this evening will focus on two important topics. We have an update on regulating registered pharmacies, and also our consultation on the initial education and training standards for pharmacists. Before we get started, just some quick housekeeping. If you have any problems with accessing the webinar or seeing the slides or hearing what we're saying, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen which you can use to type into. We have technical support on the call, so they can help you and deal with your issues whilst we're carrying on the webinar. Also, during the presentations, we will be able to take questions as well using the same Q&A box. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask as you hear what the two presenters have to say, please do put it in the Q&A. We have somebody on hand who will be answering those and stacking them up for the end of the presentation. So we will start with Julian's presentation about registered pharmacies. And then at the end of that particular section, we will be able to pose him some questions as they come through. So if you've got anything for registered pharmacies and the changes to the inspection, have a think about that as we're going through that presentation. Once we've covered that topic, we'll move on with Damien to the consultation that we're running at the moment on the initial education and training standards for pharmacists. And again, at the end of Damien's presentation, there will also be an option to pose him some Q&A questions. So again, if you've got anything, any burning questions or anything that you hear as you go through the presentation and you'd like some more information on, again, if you can put that in the Q&A box, and we will deal with that and summarise them all at the end. In previous webinars, we've had quite a few questions, so I can't guarantee that we'll get through everything, but we definitely will have some time to address some of the things that people have asked in that. Okay, so as well during the presentation, there are some opportunities to answer some polls. And first of all, it'd be great to have an idea who actually is on the call at the moment, because I know that there's a lot of different types of pharmacy professionals and potentially not people even who are qualified in pharmacy, and also different sectors are represented as well. So I will send you all a survey, and if you can just, on your screen, you should see that now, and if you can just let me know what sort of a pharmacy professional you are, that would be really helpful, and then we can tailor some of the presentations and some of the Q&A so that we know who is around and how that might affect them. So I'll just wait whilst everybody fills that in and the questions come back. So I will send the results through, and you can see there that most of us tonight are pharmacists, and we also have some pharmacy technicians along as well, some very keen pre-registration trainees, and MPharm students, and also some non-pharmacy professionals. I'm guessing there's some pharmacy owners in there as well. Thank you for that, that's really helpful. The second question we'd just like to ask before we kick off is about which sector you work in. And I'm guessing I will just give you some time to have a look at that survey and to see in which areas we're dealing with. Okay. Excellent, thanks again. So we mostly, as you can probably see, have got community pharmacists, but we've also got representation from education and training and from the hospital sector as well. Thank you very much for that, that's really helpful. And I will now pass over to Julian to tell us all about the changes to inspections and registered pharmacies.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. Last summer, we consulted on our approach to inspections and publication of inspection reports. We held a 12-week consultation, and in December 2018, GPHC Council agreed the key principles that underpin our new approach at their meeting that month. The first of the key principles is that in the future we'll be flexible, agile and responsive to the information we hold, the intelligence we receive and the issues we identify within pharmacy. This primarily relates to the different suite of inspection types that we will have in the future. So rather than have an approach of one size fits all, we will have different types of inspections that allow us to use our resources more flexibly and responsibly, depending on the nature of the information received. The second key principle that GPHC Council approved was that inspections should reflect as closely as possible how patients and the public experience pharmacy services day to day. They also decided to take forward the principle that the overall outcome of an inspection should be clear and understandable to members of the public, and that all standards for registered pharmacies need to be met every day. GPHC Council also decided that the outcome of an inspection should be open and transparent and accessible to members of the public, including where improvement action or regulatory enforcement action is required as a result. During the consultation, we held focus groups with members of the public, and they told us that people feel assured by knowing that an improvement action plan is in place and that this would not deter them from using the pharmacy. And finally, that the insights from inspection activities are accessible to everyone in the pharmacy sector. So what does that mean in practice? What are the operational implications of those principles? The first is that there will be changes to the types of inspections. So the new model that we will take forward will include 3 types of inspections: routine inspections, intelligence-led inspections, and themed inspections. We will also move to unannounced inspections as a general rule in the future. This will make sure that the outcomes of the inspection reflect whether the pharmacy is meeting the standards every day. And we would expect that the responsible pharmacist, whether a locum or not, should be able to answer the inspector's questions. And of course, the inspector involves the whole pharmacy team in the inspection, and so other members of the team would be able to answer questions too. And once an inspection is completed, the draft report is sent to the superintendent pharmacist, who has the opportunity to comment on the draft report before it is published. We will also be changing inspection outcomes. So we'll be moving to 2 possible outcomes for an inspection overall: standards met and standards not all met, and 4 possible findings at principal level: standards not all met, standards met, good practice, and excellent practice. We will be requiring that all standards must be met to receive an overall standards met outcome, and if any standard is not met, this will result in a standards not all met overall outcome. And we will be publishing inspection reports and improvement action plans when relevant on a new website. This will be designed so that the information is easy to search and analyse, and pharmacy owners will also be expected to display inspection outcomes in their pharmacies. And finally, and this received widespread support during the consultation, we'll be sharing examples of notable practice identified through inspections, which will be published in a knowledge hub on the new website. This will help encourage continuous learning and improvement in pharmacy. The notable practice case studies will cover excellent, good and poor practice. We have decided to include all 3 because you can learn from them all when things have gone well and also when they have not gone so well. We have set up and we are working with an operational reference group made up of external stakeholders from the sector across the 3 countries to develop this work, which will include criteria for selection of notable practice and to help us define what the no practice case studies look like to be useful to the sector. So, if we move on to the next slide, which is the new types of inspections.
I can do it if you want.
So we'll be using 3 types of inspection, which we use flexibly in different situations: routine inspections, intelligence-led inspections, and themed inspections. This allows us to be more responsive when we need to be, and it means that we can look at specific issues in pharmacy and services in greater detail. The first of these, of the suite of inspection types, is routine inspections. Every pharmacy would continue to have a routine inspection every 4 to 5 years, as has been the case under the current inspection model, which started in November 2013. We will be moving to a more flexible programme informed by indicators of risk when identifying which pharmacies should be inspected first. This allows us to focus our resources and to prioritise which inspections we should conduct first. We will first inspect pharmacies previously rated as poor, followed by those rated as satisfactory with an action plan. And once we have inspected pharmacies which have had action plans, we will inspect pharmacies previously rated as satisfactory without an action plan, followed by those rated as good and then excellent. This will also allow us to evaluate whether previous improvements have been sustained. Inspections will be unannounced as a general rule, and any standard not met will result in the pharmacy receiving the standards not met outcome. And in that situation, an improvement action plan will be required if the pharmacy receives a standards not all met outcome. We will also undertake intelligence-led inspections, which will be rapid response inspections initiated following intelligence identified from concerns raised about a pharmacy or people working in a pharmacy, other organisations, media stories, and intelligence from inspectors. We will be working to ensure that we have robust processes in place that allow us to judge the veracity of the intelligence we receive, which will ensure that intelligence-led inspections are undertaken in the right cases. And this will result in a written inspection report, and these inspections will be unannounced as a general rule. And finally, the third type of inspection is themed inspections. Again, this received widespread support during the consultation. We will take forward a programme of themed inspections which will involve visiting a selection of pharmacies to focus on specific themes or issues. This will enable us to better understand underlying issues, their causes and effects, and this will result in a composite report which will be published to inform the sector on the issues and risks that have been found. Findings will inform discussions on how to continue to improve pharmacy services in these areas. We have not yet agreed the programme of themed inspections, but some examples of potential topics for themed inspections include risk management in supplying medicines online or services provided to a care home. And we expect that we will conduct up to 3 themed inspections each year. So we will be changing inspection outcomes. At the overall level, we will move to a binary outcome of either standards met or standards not all met. This will provide clear and simple assurance to the public. At principal level, we have retained the graded approach. The outcomes will be standards not all met, standards met, good practice or excellent practice. The retention of a graded approach at principal level is designed to focus the pharmacy owner and the team on the content of the report, specific positive outcomes, areas for improvement or failed standards in the report. It enables us to identify notable practice, which we can share to help others to learn from and to support continuous improvement. Again, we have established an operational reference group to enable us to hear practical insights from owners and those directly involved in delivering services on how our new approach will be implemented, and any operational considerations that need to be taken into account. And then, publication. We plan to begin publishing inspection reports as well as improvement action plans where appropriate in the first quarter of 2019-2020 financial year. We will also publish short examples of notable practice to help drive continuous learning and improvement. And this new website will make it easy to search for and analyse inspection outcomes and the examples of notable practice.
Okay. Thanks, Julian. That was really helpful. We have had quite a few questions in, so I'm just going to go through what we've received. I think the first one, which might be quite useful to answer, although we have just talked about that one, is whether the inspection reports will be available to the public. So you mentioned having a website to get hold of those.
Yes. Yes. Thanks, Susanna. Absolutely, inspection reports will be available to the public. There will be the detailed inspection report, which the audience for which is primarily for the sector will be available on the new inspection publication website. There will also be a summary report, which is primarily the primary audience for which is the public, and that will also be available on the website.
Great, thanks. That's really helpful. Okay, and also around other sorts of inspections, the new sorts of inspections, will themed inspections and also intelligence-led inspections be unannounced as well as your routine ones?
Thanks, Susanna. The intelligence-led inspections will be unannounced. Themed inspections, we plan to announce these. Themed inspections could involve our inspectors doing a focused inspection analysis of up to 20 or 30 pharmacies. And so in those situations, we think it is important that we notify pharmacies that they will be part of these inspections.
Okay. So is it possible that you could actually be inspected twice, once as a sort of regular one, and then also as a themed inspection as well on top of that?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. And how will you decide your themed inspections and when? Is it sort of something that you will do on a sort of routine basis, like there's got to be at least one a year, or is it something where if you see a particular theme or a particular issue appearing that you would do it in response to that, or a combination of both? Or something different?
We plan to conduct up to 3 themed inspections each year. We are developing criteria around how we select a theme, but I think it's important that the themes will need to be useful to the sector, and we want the reports to be able to inform the sector and to drive learning, so they will need to be relevant.
Great, that's really helpful. Do you have it says here, do you have a date for the process to start? We mentioned sort of quarter 1, quarter 2. The different bits of what we're actually doing, because we're publishing inspection reports and doing different theme stuff and the different elements of that.
Sure. So in the council paper that went to council in December, we explained that the plan was to start publishing inspection reports in the first quarter of the 2019-2020 financial year. That is still the plan. We're not able to release the exact date just yet, but we are still working towards the first quarter.
Great, that's good to know. Okay, another question here which is a bit more technical, and it says how many goods or standards met will result in a standards all met? How does that work?
That is quite a technical question. We are developing our approach around this area by refreshing the inspection decision-making framework, which is the key tool that inspectors use to reach their inspection judgments, and that work is ongoing and will be published before we move to the new model.
Great, that's good to know. So work in progress. Okay, here's another question about inspections. How does the GPHC assess the quality of service? Will it happen in a different way to now, and how can people prepare for that?
So I think it's important to remember that the standards for registered pharmacies have not changed. So the inspectors will continue to assess the quality of service in exactly the same way that they do currently. Great,
that's good to know. I'm just checking if there's anything else that's coming through. And how will locums affect inspections? If you went into a pharmacy and there were locum pharmacists there, is there anything different that you do or that people need to be aware of if they have locums in their pharmacy? I'm sure that affects quite a few people.
This is a question that is normally raised in connection with unannounced inspections. What happens when there is a locum present? We expect standards to be met every single day, and we our approach to unannounced inspections is that we want our inspectors to experience what the public experience. We expect the responsible pharmacist to be able to answer the questions from our inspector, whether they are permanent members of staff or whether they are a locum.
Mm-hmm. And how long do you think the inspections will take? Will it be similar to how long it takes now, or is it longer or shorter? Because the question was at about 4 hours. I don't know whether they've had an inspection recently.
We expect inspections to take up to 3 hours, and we are not anticipating any significant change in that.
Well, that's great. Okay, and we have another question about the publication of inspection reports. And how soon will reports be made available to the public after the inspection has taken place?
We are working hard on the process. Once the inspection report has been quality assured, and we plan to make information available on our website, which sets out very clearly the timescales that we will be working towards, and how soon after inspection a report will be published.
Right, so it's not clear at the moment, but we need to make sure that there's a process in place first. Cool. There's another question here about action plans. In fact, what support will the GPHC give around fulfilling an action plan? So if a pharmacy is inspected and we feel that an action plan is necessary.
I think it's important to remember that responsibility for meeting the standards rests with the pharmacy and the pharmacy owner, so the responsibility lies there, but there are obviously a lot of tools and information and materials available on our website which can be accessed, including things like the decision-making framework, which I referred to earlier.
Great. Okay. So somebody's asked a question about how many inspections a year. I think it might be worth going over exactly how it sort of works. It's because they're saying, will there be 3 inspections a year, an intelligence, a themed and normal one? I'm guessing for the individual types of inspections it's different amounts.
No, so all pharmacies will be inspected under the new routine inspection model. We anticipate that the cycle will be 4 to 5 years, which is broadly similar to what it is now. It's impossible to predict whether the same pharmacy might also receive an intelligence-led inspection. That depends on the intelligence that we receive as an organisation. And until we have developed a themed inspection model, again, it's not possible to say whether a specific pharmacy will be subject to a themed inspection as well. It's possible,
Mhm. Okay, so you're definitely guaranteed an inspection in the same way that you were before, and then the other ones on top depends on what we receive and what we think is important to have received, or an intelligence-led inspection. Okay, I think this one might be quite simple. Please could you repeat the different outcomes of the inspections again? And it might be interesting as well, because we were talking about having a top-level public report and then the more detailed one as well.
So in terms of inspection outcomes, at overall level, we are moving to a binary outcome of standards met, standards not all met at top level. Underneath that, the principal level findings, we have retained the graded approach. So it will be standards not met, standards met, good practice, and excellent practice. And those are the outcomes.
Excellent. That was an easy one. Okay, this is a kind of interesting question about the public. Is there work happening with the public to help them understand what good practice is, if they're going to be having all these inspection reports?
Absolutely. We plan to ensure that there are materials available on the website as we move to the new model, so that the public can ensure what they can expect from a good pharmacy. Great,
okay. And I think there's one final thing that we're looking at, also about public. What will the public see on the report? Is it just standards not all met, or any more? What will happen to confidential information? So potentially, I guess, business information, or names and addresses and that kind of thing.
I can confirm we will not be publishing confidential information, and we will not be publishing information that is commercially sensitive or a risk around security of medicines.
And do they see, is there any sort of explanation as well as just the standards, the not met or the met?
What will be available on the website will be the summary report, which is drawn from the detailed report, and that will show standards not all met at overall level, but it will show the principal level findings as well.
Great, thank you very much. I think that's pretty much everything we've received. So without further ado, we'll move on to the consultation, and I'll hand over to Damien Day, our GPHC Head of Education.
Okay, well, thank you very much for logging in. What I'm speaking about now is a consultation on new education standards. So one of our key responsibilities is to make sure that standards on which sort of MPharms are written and on which pre-registration is based is refreshed. And we do that on a periodic basis. Normally it's about every 5 or 6 years. It's been a little bit longer since the current set were introduced. That was in 2011. So we are consulting at the moment. We started consulting in January, and we will carry on consulting until April. So if you have a particular interest in education and training, there's still enough time for you to actually fill in our consultation feedback form. So what I'll be doing now is I'll be explaining the main issues on which we are consulting. And as you can see from the slide that's just flashed up, I think one of our concerns is that the role of the pharmacist is moving so rapidly, and I can see that quite a lot of you are pharmacists, so I expect you'll be agreeing with that we really do need to update the education and training standards. If you think back 10 years to what you were doing then and what you're doing now, think how much it's changed, because education standards take some time to be introduced. So if you think about it, if we change our standards now, once you've been through an MPharm, which is 4 years, and then a pre-registration year after that, and then our national examination, we won't actually see the impact on the register for at least 5 or 6 years. And in fact, normally when you're setting education standards, you're looking ahead probably a decade. So that's been our task. So I suppose one important question is how we worked on them. Well, so first of all, what we did was we asked a whole range of stakeholders. We asked government where they thought pharmacy would be heading. We asked all of the schools of pharmacy, of which there are now 30. We also asked a lot of pre-registration trainers. We also asked the RPS. We also asked the BPSA. So we had quite a lot of evidence to go on before we started to draft them. And then we established our high-level education advisory group, which is drawn from across all of the sectors, includes a lot of educators and a lot of trainers, so we could sense check where we thought we were heading. We also set up 3 expert groups, and I'll explain what each of them did in summary. The first looks at the learning outcomes. So for those of you who are not so familiar with education, learning outcomes are how we describe what somebody has to know and do whilst they're in training and in education. So they've been refreshed, and so they should, if you look at them, run you through the kinds of things that you should be doing in pharmacies in 5 or 6 years or more from now. Then we moved on to prescribing, and we were looking at independent prescribing in particular. And the question that we were sort of asking was, would it be reasonable and safe to allow independent prescribing when somebody is first registered, in other words, on day one? And what we concluded was no, that there wasn't enough experience and there wasn't enough exposure to patients in the 5 years leading up to registration. So for now, we'll still be requiring somebody to do an additional course in order to become annotated as an independent prescriber. And then the third area that we looked at in one of these working groups was pre-registration training, and particularly the QA around it. And what we concluded was that the current situation in which there are just 4 tutor sign-offs isn't really enough. So we'll be moving to a model in which there will be a requirement for regular update meetings between trainees and tutors, and those meetings must be documented so you can see how you're progressing as a trainee or areas in which you're struggling. So that was some of the initial work that we did, but I guess the biggest change is what we are consulting on is a move to a 5-year degree with pre-registration integrated in it. And the logic there is to make sure that the whole 5 years have been thought of as a coherent whole, rather than as is at the moment, where the 4-year MPharm is designed and then pre-registration is separate. And so, in other words, we're moving to the model which is more closely aligned to medicine and also nursing and dentistry. So, in other words, the mainstream of healthcare profession education. And it's also the sort of pharmacy education there is in America. It's the kind of pharmacy education there is in Ireland. It's the kind of pharmacy education there is in Canada, and also Australia and New Zealand are consulting at the moment, almost at the same time as us, on integrated degrees. So aspects of the new courses should be much more clinical work in the early years of the course, greater exposure to patients, also more working with other healthcare professionals to basically reflect the daily lives of pharmacists. Also, changes to selection and admission, and I'll say some more about that in a moment, and then some changed requirements around equality and diversity, and I'll expand on that as well. So, all in all, what this will mean is that MPharms should be co-created with more input from training providers rather than just schools themselves doing it, and that should be in part due to a much closer relationship between MPharm providers in universities and also training providers. More exposure to patients, as I said, and a more structured approach to pre-registration and a closer integration between it and the bits of learning that you do at university. But I think if you look on that slide, the final point is quite important, that we are not saying that one size fits all, and there may well be quite a number of models of 5-year MPharms, indeed as there are at the moment in the 4-year MPharms, and countries may choose to do their own thing, which is fine by us as long as the learning outcomes outcomes are met. So there may be a model in England, there may be a model in Scotland, there may be a model in Wales, and that's absolutely fine. As long as they are delivering the outcomes, then we think as the regulator, we are comfortable with that. So just to dwell on integration for a little longer, because it's quite an important point. I think the main benefit is coherence of design across the whole 5 years. So most of you have a pharmacy degree, and some of you are on one at the moment. Just imagine what it would be like if you had done the first few years of your MPharm at one university and then being forced to move somewhere else. Would that have been more or less coherent for you? What we're hearing is that no, that wouldn't be the case. So we're just applying that logic to the MPharm and to pre-reg as a whole. If the whole 5 years are looked at, the chances are there'll be more logic and more coherence overall. Also, we've heard a lot from pre-registration training providers that there's quite a lot of duplication in the pre-reg training year because students don't remember things that they learnt in their MPharm. So hopefully building out duplication will be another benefit. Also, there's the opportunity for students to stay part of a student community. And those of you who are pre-reg trainers or recent pre-reg trainees might have had a quite isolated experience if you're in a small pharmacy with not many other healthcare professionals around and maybe almost no other pre-reg trainees nearby. So the integration will keep that support from your group. Other reasons to make the change are it simply brings us into line with the other healthcare professions. They've all moved to integrated degrees for a reason, which is that it's the most effective way of integrating academic study and learning and work. And I think, as you can see on the slide, by making students do things earlier on, it sticks in the mind. If you think about the way that you've learned a practical task, you read about it and then you do it straight away. So that's one of the other logics behind integration. So one of the things that we'll be doing is asking the schools to analyse the profile of their students in terms of protected characteristics. So that's age, sex, and other things like that, to see whether some groups do better than others. And if that's the case, or if some do worse, why that might be, and think about modifying their MPharm accordingly. So quite a lot of schools do this anyway, so for them it may not be a big change. One thing we are asking about for the first time is about admissions standards, and particularly if a university advertises a set of A-level grades that must be met, what happens if a student doesn't meet them? Should they be allowed to enter the MPharm? And this is because we've noticed over the last few years that increasing numbers of students are being allowed in not having met the grade. It's now over 30 or 40% for A-level applicants. So we're asking if you think that is reasonable or whether students should have to meet the standard in order to be admitted. So on that subject, we are now sending you a question about MPharm admissions. So if you'd like to read the question, send in your response. We'll let you have 15 seconds or so to think about it, and then we'll send you the results of your survey. Okay, well, here's the outcome, and what I would say is that we've been analysing the responses that we've had so far, and they are broadly similar with what you think. That is that the majority of you think that the standards should be met. So thank you for that. And now I think we have another poll which we'll move on to. So this is a question about admissions itself. And one of the things that we've been asking is whether or not, as well as just looking at academic grades, applicants for MPharms should actually be interviewed. So you can judge their communication skills, the kinds of things that are becoming more important for pharmacists. So we'll send you that question, and then if you could respond in the same way, that would be really helpful. So we'll just wait 15 seconds or so again. Okay, well, as you can see, pretty much all of you think that we should be making that a requirement, and as I've said, that's one of the things that we're thinking of introducing. So that's quite interesting. So now we'll move on to the questions that you've been sending in, and so the first one is whether or not we will continue to have the registration assessment. That, let's just remind everybody, that's the national exam that everybody has to pass at the end of the pre-registration year. The answer is, for now, yes. So when we were looking at whether or not we should include a revision of that in this revision of the standards, we thought that that was a step too far. So I'm not saying that it will never change, because it's inevitable that at some stage it will. But for now, it'll stay as it is. So something else you've asked is what we are doing to make sure that newly qualified pharmacists are good communicators and more well-rounded. Well, what you've heard me speaking about so far is the need for increased clinical work, increased exposure to patients, and where that is the case, that is what we've been seeing. So we've been seeing that students are more confident communicators, and by interacting more with the public, they just find it easier in the early years of practice. So hopefully the changes that we are proposing will actually do that. I think I've just covered this point, which is about admissions requiring a face-to-face element. That is one of our proposals, because at the moment there are some schools that only accept individuals on the basis of their academic ability and nothing else, often without actually meeting them. So we are saying that there should be a face-to-face and an interactive element in admissions for all students. And now somebody's asked a question about the standards and knowledge of pre-registration tutors. And this is a question that's been asked a number of times, because tutors working in some sectors are actually trained by their employers, and in some they're not. So we acknowledge that it's an area where there is some good practice and some less good. So we have raised this with some of the funding bodies to see whether they might have a role to play in the QA of tutors. We've been asked a question about the learning in practice element of a 5-year course. Now that's what we currently call pre-registration, and the requirement is for 52 weeks to be labelled as pre-registration. But the question is that a minimum, or is it everything? And the answer is it's only a minimum, because in all MPharms at the moment there are additional training periods as well. So sometimes in the school itself, sometimes out in pharmacies. So that will continue, but with the integrated course, we hope that there will be a more coherent design. So the training in the MPharm will lead more obviously into what is currently called pre-registration training. Another question now about the exam, and that's, are we thinking of turning it into something more like an OSCE. An OSCE is an examination where you actually watch somebody do something. So obviously our exam at the moment is a written exam. Might we be moving to an OSCE? Well, when we come to look at the exam, which as I said won't be for a few years, but it could change, and one of the things that we could look at is the OSCE style examination. And as some of you may know, there's a national OSCE examination in Canada. Another question about pre-registration reports to be submitted electronically. Well, that happens in some places. So, for example, in some parts of the NHS and also in Scotland, there is already the facility for an e-portfolio. It's not within our plans, but we have raised it with a number of providers, and we think that there'll be more electronic submission than there is at the moment. We've also been asked if the supervisor in pre-reg also is their mentor, and the answer is currently that is the case for some, although in some parts of the country your tutor is also your assessor, but in other parts of the country they've moved to that being separated out, so the individual who assesses you is not the one who's trained you. So at the end of the pre-registration year there is a final sign-off. At the moment, there's one tutor responsible for that, even though someone may actually have been tutored by a number of people. Our plan at the moment is still to hold one individual responsible for the sign-off, but they may well draw on the views of quite a number of colleagues when they're making that final judgment. So the question is, can training providers work with multiple universities? Well, that's certainly the case at the moment. Some of the big training providers work across a number of universities and have quite well-established relationships with them. I can't think of a reason why that might not continue, and certainly we wouldn't set anything in standards that would stop that sort of working. Now we've been asked a question about, will integration allow learning and application of non-clinical skills? Well, I suppose the most obvious example of that will be the application of the science that underpins the whole course. So yes, clearly clinical skills will be tested, but also alongside that will be ability to apply the science that they've learned, particularly in the early years of the farm. So I think this might be the last question. So the question is, what will be the role of NHS Education Scotland and Health Education England in placing pre-registrations in the final year? Well, the way that it might work in England is through the new oral application scheme, so that something like halfway through the integrated degree, you'll be asked to select your pre-registration blocks, and then they would be allocated as they are at the moment in the oral system, and that also applies in Wales too. And in Scotland, NHS Education Scotland have a well-established application system for what is currently pre-reg, and there are discussions going on in Scotland about how that needs to be modified for an integrated degree. Some of you will know that in Scotland there has been a decision to implement 5 years for everybody. So I think that's the end of the education question. So I'll now hand you over for a sign-off back to Susanna. But before I do that, if you could just look at the next steps slide. As I said at the beginning, the consultation is open until the start of April. Then we will write a report for the GPHC's council. And then we will have further meetings with external stakeholders if we think that's necessary. And then hopefully, if they are agreed, there will be a managed transition from the old standards to the new ones, also with some guidance for all stakeholders. But I think the thing to emphasise is that we're saying that everybody has to work together, the schools of pharmacy and the training providers and the funders, to help these standards be implemented. Now, you've obviously shown an interest in this webinar, so if you could just look at this slide with the web address for the consultation. If you are interested in what you've heard in this latter section about education, do consider sending in a response. You don't have to answer every single question. If you've just got views about a particular issue or one or two issues but not the whole lot, that's absolutely fine. Just answer the questions that suit you. But we would like as wide a set of responses as we can. So with that plug, now I will hand you over to Susanna to end the session.
Okay, thank you very much, Damien. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Just to let you know that we've had a couple of requests for the slides. This presentation will actually be available as a recording within about 48 hours. So if you log on with the same logon details that you did to join this webinar in about Wednesday time, then this will actually be available. We will be putting a link on our website as well. So if you do have colleagues and other people who you'd like to share it with, then they can absolutely log on and listen back to this. So yeah, just to wrap up, say thank you very much for joining us, and I hope this has been useful. If there are any other questions, you can always email info@pharmacyregulation.org. Our contact centre are very helpful, and they will be able to pass questions on to the policy team if they need to. There is also resources on our website as well, so do have a look around pharmacyregulation.org. We will be updating sections on the inspections, and also there is the Get Involved tab, which has got all the information about the initial education and training of pharmacy standards consultation. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of your evening.